I want to welcome you to the Pro Mindset Podcast. The Pro Mindset Podcast is all about diving into the headspace that results in championship performance. High-performing athletes, winners, have this mental flow and have a positive headspace for their performances and success. Join me, Craig Domann, sports attorney and NFL agent, on this podcast. I will interview pro athletes, college athletes, football coaches, and sports personalities. Together, we can discover how you can get in the flow and have your own pro mindset. Okay, so today on Pro Mindset, I have a gentleman who is involved in officiating football and basketball at multiple levels, but his highest level is being an NFL official. I want to welcome Randy Campbell to the show. Randy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Craig. I appreciate it very much.
Okay, so Randy is a neighbor of mine. He lives in Colorado. And so, Randy, why don't you share with us how long you've been officiating NFL football?
Well, this will be my fourth year. I'll be an NFL replay official. Before that, I was on the college football field for 31 years. 25 of those years was at the Division I level in Mountain West, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 conferences. I have two basketball jobs. I've been a Division I women's basketball official for 31 years. I've done 25 NCAA tournaments, and I'm currently a supervisor of basketball officials for Division II league in our backyard, Craig, the Rocky Mountain Athletic Conference. But I had a great year, a great career on the field. I did the national championship. I've done a semifinal game, and I did 6 different conference championship games. So I was blessed on the field, but really looking forward to being full-time in the NFL this upcoming season. Okay, so let's talk about the NFL. How long ago did they start hiring guys to be off-the-field officials, replay officials? They started looking at this concept of having replay officials in the booth probably in the 80s, and they originally did it for, I think, about 5 years, and then they put it to the side for a few years. But I think they've been full-time now for about 20 years, having replay officials in the booth. And like everything else in life, it has evolved over the years. I believe this is about the 23rd year they've had replay officials full-time now. Okay,
so let's talk about the role of replay. The ideology behind it is to get the right call. Is that fair?
That's fair. The concept is that the ruling on the field is correct, and then you have video evidence that shows that either it's not correct or it's inconclusive or it's confirmed. And basically, I think everybody that's involved in athletics, whether it's football, any sport, basketball, baseball, and I think everybody wants to get it correct. And, Major League Baseball, I believe, is now in their 5th year of having a replay system. And now all the college conferences have a command center. If something's incorrect on the field, and of course we use the term egregious, we don't want to micromanage everything on the field, but if there's something that's egregiously wrong on the field, replay at the collegiate level, all these various professional sports help out.
How does it impact, and how did it impact the officiating crew when replay was introduced? Let's go to 1 year before BC, before video, before replay, where whatever you called stood. And yes, you might get booed, and yes, your white hat or whoever the supervising official may go, hey, are you sure that was right? Maybe somebody else saw it differently. But pretty much what you said, what you saw, what you called was the answer. And then we go into this replay world where it makes sense that you're schooled a little bit differently because you want to allow the play to play out just in case you are wrong so that you're not punishing the team that you potentially wronged. How did that change?
When you look at the development of replay, I kind of compare it to technology that we have with computers. Think of where computers were 20 years ago and where they're at now. And that's kind of how replays evolved over the years, both at the collegiate level, NFL, all these other sports. And in the past, before replay, of course, I refereed on the field before there was replay. And on the field, you would make a call, didn't know till after the game or maybe even the next day that, oh my gosh, the call I just made or the no call I made was incorrect. The officiating goal is typically this. The officials are there to make sure one team doesn't gain an advantage over the other team within the rules of the game. That's really the only reason we have officials. And so that's the premise, that we don't want to see a team gain an advantage over the other team within the rules of the game. So now with replay, and of course I've refereed on the field now with replay for about 15 years. And actually it's kind of nice in a way on the field that if I do make a mistake, it's correct, but now I can move on. I think sometimes in the back of your mind, if you made a mistake, you're in the back of your mind, you're going, oh my gosh, well, I won't find out till after the game or the next day. Well, now we don't have that anymore. You pretty much know on the field if a mistake was made. And I think the coaches and players, if you look at Major League Baseball, the number of ejections that have gone down in Major League Baseball because of replay, because now they know that replay corrected a mistake that was made by the baseball umpires. And I think that's true in football. You don't see as many arguments from coaches or players because they know that replay corrected a mistake that happened.
Well, did you pay attention to the XFL and the access the media and the the broadcast had to the replay officials?
A little bit. I was still heavily involved in college basketball, so I was still traveling around the country. I would catch bits and pieces. Of course, I had some friends that refereed on the field in the XFL, and I had some friends in the replay booth in the XFL, and where the public could see in real time what was going on, not only on the field, but in dealing with coaches and players on the sideline, but also what was going on in the replay booth. And of course, XFL, I do know this, has some different rules and some different mechanics that they use as compared to college and the NFL. But unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see much of it.
Well, I think it was interesting for the fan because you at least, full disclosure, transparency is always a good thing in any industry, any sport, any area of any sport. It was eye-opening for me, too, just to watch the conversations that took place. The thing that I liked about it was everybody's trying to do the right thing. It doesn't matter, the official, whether he made the call or not, he wants the right call, the guy on the field. And then you've got the replay official in the booth. He's trying to figure it out and make the right call. And so that, I think, in the sense of fairness, it was cool to see because, a lot of times, players and coaches and fans think the officials are out to get them, and they're not.
I'll give you an example that will disprove that statement, that officials are out to get the players or the teams. Basically, officials have about 1 second to make a decision on the field. They don't have enough time in that 1 second to think about players, teams, or anything else. They can only spend that 1 second thinking about what call or no call they're going to make. And I equate it to, everybody can relate to this, and I'm sure, Craig, you've been on I-25 in Colorado Springs. Did somebody pull out in front of you at the last second and you had 1 second to make a decision? You did. Everybody does. Making that decision of how to avoid that accident. You're not thinking about the type of car in front of you. You're not thinking about the person in front of you. And I equate that example of spending that 1 second trying to avoid a collision. That's what officials have to go through. They've got 1 second to make a decision on the field. And so when you think about officiating, the people to listen to this, always think about that example I said about the car coming to a complete stop in front of you, and you got 1 second to make a decision. That's what officials have to go through.
Well said. Let's go back to, you're recognized as an NFL official, but your day job is you're an official as well. Why don't you share for the audience what you do outside of the NFL? You kind of mentioned it earlier, but go more in depth in what you do.
Well, I got started about 40 years ago, and actually I grew up in Central California near Fresno, a small town called Tulare, and I got started umpiring when I was at the age of 15 years of age. I'm 62 right now, and you could umpire for triple the pay of what minimum wage was at that time. Well, then I did intramurals in college, and then when I went to Farmington, New Mexico, that was my first job in the oil and gas industry. I did high school football, high school basketball, and high school baseball. I've refereed 5 sports, but the 2 major sports I do is football and basketball. So I did high school football in New Mexico and in Colorado. And officiating is similar to the corporate world. You have to start at the bottom and work your way up. And each step that you take is just a little bit harder. And it should be harder because there's more scrutiny. There's a lot more things involved when you get up to the professional ranks. So I did state championships in the state of Colorado, got into the Rocky Mountain Athletic Conference, did that for a few years. Then I got into Division I. And I was fortunate that I did Division I for 25 years. I'm actually the only official in the country that's done, like I said earlier, a national championship, which was Notre Dame versus Alabama in 2013. I did a semifinal game, which was the Fiesta Bowl 4 years ago. That was Clemson versus Ohio State. And I did a conference championship game in the Big 12. I did 5 in the Pac-12. So I'm the only official to have done all 3 of those things. But we have a joke in officiating that Father Time's undefeated. And I knew that you don't see a lot of officials over the age of 60 on the field in the collegiate ranks. And The NFL opportunity came a couple of years ago, but I wasn't quite ready to come off the field. But I had worked in the replay booth the last 3 years in Denver. Thoroughly enjoyed the replay booth and thoroughly enjoyed the NFL, the camaraderie. But now I get a chance to go to all these 31 other NFL stadiums. I've refereed in 11 of the 31 NFL stadiums, but there's about 20 NFL stadiums I've never been to. And then in conjunction with that, I've been a NCAA basketball official all this time. I just finished my 31st year on the court. I had a milestone this past year. I did my 2000 Division I women's basketball game back in November. It was at the University of Denver. My family got a chance to celebrate with me, and I was fortunate. I did 25 straight NCAA tournaments, Division I tournaments, and I think everybody around the country right now is missing the NCAA tournament. Right now we should be in the Final Four, both for the men and the women. I've done 10 regionals and 4 regional finals. I've been blessed in that regard, and I've been self-employed, Craig. I've owned a very small oil and gas company the last 26 years. I'm fortunate I've been able to work out of my house, which is, I thoroughly have enjoyed that. And that comes in handy now with the coronavirus that's going on.
No doubt. Kind of share for everyone one of the funnier times you've had being an official, with a coach or with a fan, just something behind the scenes that's clean but fun.
Oh my gosh, how much time do you have? It's amazing. I've been blessed. I have refereed with some outstanding coaches in both women's basketball and in football. A few years ago, and I will not mention the coach's name, it was the first year that we had a 30-second timeout in college football. In the pregame, you always ask the coach, hey, what formations you have, what do you want us to look for, and do you have any rules questions? Well, it was the first game of the year, and this was a veteran coach. He won, actually, a national championship. He goes, I just got one question. How long is a 30-second timeout? And I'm going, is he serious? And then I look at him, and then he realizes what question he asked. And he goes, is that the dumbest question you've ever been asked? And I said, no, not really. I said, my wife asked a lot of dumb questions. And he kind of laughed and chuckled, and he goes, well, I guess there's nothing I can say to you guys the rest of the game. And he was perfect the whole game. And when I had him a second time later that year, obviously we asked the same question again. He goes, okay, I'm done with rules. I know how long a 30-second timeout is. And I was surprised he remembered it. A basketball situation, I'll never forget this, was with Pat Summitt at Tennessee. And this was the first year that in college basketball you had to use a timeout in the first half or you lose it. And I'm at Florida State, and there's 3 seconds to go in the half, and Tennessee's going to inbound the ball in front of the bench, and they got to go 65 feet to the basket. And they haven't used their timeout. And I asked Pat Summitt, you haven't used your timeout. Do you want to use it? And she looks at the scoreboard. She goes, yeah, I want to use it. And she goes, and before I inbound the ball, she goes, that's a good piece of officiating. That's why you're in the regional semifinals. That's why you're working this game. And I felt pretty good about myself. I'm going, God, I got a compliment from Pat Summitt. Well, lo and behold, it was DePaul University. I'll never forget this. DePaul had not pressed the whole first half. So what did they decide to do? They decided to press the inbounds. So Tennessee throws it in. DePaul steals it and makes a layup. I'm going, oh, my gosh. So now I'm at half court. The half is ended, and Pat Summitt has that stare. I don't know if you remember. She has that stare, and she has that swagger walking. And I'm there with my two partners, and they're kind of laughing a little bit because they know what's going to happen. And she walks by me, and I take a deep breath. And I'm going, oh, she's going to go to the locker room. And she turns around and points at me and says, well, do you have any other advice for my team before I go into halftime? And I thought I said no, but someone said I said it with a high-pitched voice because I was fairly new in the NCAA tournament this time. Lo and behold, the game almost goes overtime. And when the game was over, my partners go, God, Randy, just think if this game had gone overtime and Tennessee was number 1 ranked in the country, what would have happened if they had lost because you told her that she could use her timeout? But there's a lot of other stories that most of them are, most are pretty clean. But I always tell people this, and this is true in life too. Things can be taken away from you in life, and that's true in fishing, but nobody can take memories away. I have a lot of great memories of working with NFL officials when they're in the college ranks. I've worked with WNBA. I've worked with NBA officials. You know, one of my idols growing up was John Wooden, and I was able to work a women's basketball game at UCLA and got my picture and autograph with John Wooden. And those type of memories nobody can take away.
That's for sure. How do you get started?
Well, the best thing to do, there's two things. I always get asked this, what's the attributes of a great official? And number one is you've got to be teachable. And if you have succeeded in your business or your career, or if you succeeded in college, probably you succeeded because you were teachable. And if you take that one principle of teachability, you can apply it to officiating. You can succeed in officiating. But believe it or not, officiating is a microcosm of what goes on in our country, in that somebody, I'm sure, Craig, you had a mentor in life. Somebody helped you get to where you're at. You have to have a mentor. The best thing to do is start at the high school ranks. And during times of economic crisis like this, we start to see a lot of people that want to officiate. Now is a great time to officiate because at the high school ranks, this is nationwide, not just Colorado, we need high school officials. So folks are listening to this podcast. If you want to be an official, contact your state association and start going to meetings, because there is a huge, huge need for high school officials right now. Right now, some of these high schools are having to move game times. Some of the schools that play Friday night football now have to play Thursday night or Saturday afternoon. That's because there's a lack of officials out there. So people are listening to this, definitely, contact your high school activities association. Every state has one, and they'll have a link in there that how you can get started to be an official. And I will say this, if you're teachable and you're willing to give 100% effort on and off the field, on and off the court, you can succeed in officiating.
Okay, so let's go to a typical game. Let's say it's a national championship game. You've done one of those. Let's say it's just a regular season NFL game. What is the pregame routine for most officials, or is it unique to each one?
Football is a little different than basketball. Football typically, and I'm going to use college football as an example, but NFL is pretty much the same, except it's a different day. Most college football games are on a Saturday. Typically, by the time the game's over, you've got your iPad. You can start watching plays right then and there. So, and then people start grading the game, ex-officials or administrators. Usually it's ex-officials. So they'll start grading that game the next day. So within 48 hours after the game's over, you pretty much have your assessment, what you've done right and what you've done wrong. I'm a coordinator too, and I always tell people, I tell my officials, I don't mind you make mistakes. Two things. Hopefully, one, it's not egregious. And the second thing is you don't make the same mistake over and over again. And so for us, the pregame really starts about 5 days before we actually kick off. Because then after we get our grades, we'll watch the film as a crew. What did we do well as a crew? We practice the we concept. It's not I. There's no I in team, as you've heard. It's we. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And we try not to make that same mistake when we go into the next game. So basically our pregame, we're pretty much done with our pregame by the time we get to the stadium. The day before the game, we fly in from different parts of the country, and we'll sit down and watch film, and we'll watch plays that happen in other games in our league, and we'll watch plays of the two teams we're going to referee, because most of the mistakes officials make is when they get caught by surprise. And we try to take the surprise element out. So we study film. Typically, it's not unusual to watch at least 14 hours of film before we do a game the next week. And then when we're at the game site, we're into our administration mode where, there's so many moving elements in football. You've got the game clock operator you have to visit with. You got the play clock operator that you have to visit with. You have to visit with the TV liaison. You have to visit with the TV talent. You have to visit with the chain crew, the people that run the sticks, the down markers. You have to visit with the ball boys. You have to visit with the OC and DC, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. You got to visit with the quarterback. You got to visit with the head coach. And typically we get to the stadium about 3 hours before kickoff. And that sounds like a long time before the game. It's amazing, Craig, how fast that 3 hours go, because everybody has so many duties to do. And we got to be on the field 60 minutes for kickoff, looking at uniform equipment. We're looking at plays, formations. I think people feel like, they just show up to the stadium and referee. But it really is it's a week of preparation, and it goes on week after week after week. But it's really a good 5 days of preparation before an official ever steps on the field. Basketball's a little different because basketball plays. I always joke with my wife that in basketball we play on every day that ends in Y. And basketball, we don't. You still do some parts of it, but you may have a game on a Saturday night, then you have a Sunday afternoon game. You may have a game 14 hours later, so you don't have that chance to. You have a chance to look at some plays, but you don't have a chance to really go into that detailed preparation in basketball that you do in football.
Well, it sounds like to me one of the most important things for an official is having a growth mindset and also having self-awareness so that you're growing through the process, but you're also aware of your strengths and weaknesses because you're really kind of you're playing a dynamic role because you've got to be consistent. You've got to get better. The coordinator officials are saying, hey, let's make sure we're calling this or we're not calling that. Things that happen, during the course of off seasons as well as during the season where they try to, it's almost like a political statement where they like, hey, let's stop calling this violation unless it makes an impact on the play.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I always say this. I mentioned one. There's really two reasons why we have officials. I mentioned one of them earlier. Make sure a team doesn't gain an advantage over the other team within the rules of the game. The other aspect is safety. Safety supersedes everything. We're there for a safety factor. And I think the worst thing that we want as officials is if we miss something and somebody got hurt from it. That's critical. And there's a saying in officiating, you got to start perfect and then you got to get better from there. And I played, ironically, I don't referee or umpire college baseball, but that's the sport I played in college was baseball. In baseball, we played Craig double hitters all the time. Invariably, we would lose our first game of double hitter if we lost a tough game or we blew something or we did something wrong. Our coach, between games, would always say, guys, we're not going to lose twice on the same game. And I took that into life. I took that into officiating, meaning that you got to, in officiating in particular, you got to move on. You have to have a short memory in officiating because if you make a mistake on the field or on the court and you dwell on it mentally, you're going to make another mistake. But we're human beings, and I know that I emphasize to my officials that I'm supervisor for that, hey, look, as long as it's not egregious and nobody suffered an injury, you got to learn to move on. I think the people that are thinking about officiating, that's what you got to do. That's true all the way from Pee Wee all the way up to the NFL.
No question. I think one of the things that's a little bit of a misnomer is that professional sports is different. And, I coached youth sports when my boys were growing up, and I would find myself talking to my client on the drive to practice about some issue that also applied to the 9-year-olds that I was coaching. I'm guessing in officiating it's kind of the same. It's still the same.
You know what it is, and I'm going to drop a couple of names to you. Players that I refereed at the collegiate level that went on to have great NFL careers. One of them is Andrew Luck. When he was at Stanford, I'll never forget this game. The first series, he threw a pick six. I believe it was against USC or UCLA. I don't remember. And I'll never forget. He came to the sideline and he told the Coach Shaw at Stanford, "Hey, I've moved on. We're going to get the ball back and we're going to score and we're not going to have another turnover the rest of the day." And I was thinking to myself, here's a 20-year-old. Just calmly came over to the head coach, told him, hey, that was my bad. We're not going to have a turnover the rest of the day. We're going to go down and score on these guys, and we're going to win the game. We just made one mistake. We're going to move on. And I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking there's a lot of people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, their whole life. They couldn't move on as fast as what he did. And another player that's having a great NFL career right now is Christian McCaffrey. He also played at Stanford. He's with the Carolina Panthers. I remember he missed a block really bad. There was a blitz coming, and he totally missed it. And his quarterback got sacked, fumbled, and the defense recovered. And same thing with him. I'll never forget, in the huddle, he goes, that ain't happening again. I made a mistake, but I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. And I'm just amazed that when I was on the college football field, how athletically these players are great. We know they are, but mentally how great they are. And that was the one great thing about officiating is I got to see these players up close and how great they are mentally. There's no way fans on TV or in the stands can see how great mentally these players are. And you mentioned the XFL. I think that's why you enjoyed it, because you got to see how great the conversation between the coaches and the players and the officials in the replay booth. I think that's why you liked it. And that's why we didn't know that football was that detailed, and they didn't know that, man, these folks are really, really smart. And I think that's why people enjoyed the XFL that was in business for 5 weeks.
No doubt. Well, one of the things I've seen from being on the agent side is been to a lot of games, get there early, stay late, see the guys before the game, see them at the hotel sometimes if it's a mid-afternoon or Sunday evening game or Monday night game. And you also get to see them after the game. And the pros, the best guys, the pros is what a lot of people call them, they did all the right things. They had a preparation plan. They had a decompression plan. They had the front end, the back end. I'll never forget, I was at a Chiefs-Patriots game on a Monday night about 4 years ago, and the Chiefs just demolished them. And then the Patriots went on to win like 11 or 12 in a row after that during the regular season, and then ended up winning the Super Bowl. But the thing that really struck me was the pre-game routine that Tom Brady put himself through. He had a routine. It was almost like a play. And he was rehearsing every throw he was potentially going to make in the game. And he had his tight end and receivers working with him. But it wasn't just going through the motions. What have you seen from an official standpoint about the competitors, the athletes, that has impressed you?
The best officials I've worked with, and I've worked with I could name drop and just mention all the great officials I worked with. The preparation, they never got caught by surprise. And the players that I refereed, both in basketball and football, what they did off the court, off the field, all the preparation they did, they never got caught by surprise. Every once in a while, we're human, we will get caught by surprise. And you mentioned Tom Brady. Before I got into the NFL, I used to do the Denver Bronco practices. They still hire officials to come out and do their practices. And the preparation, the film review, everything they did, basically they were doing that. They were ready for every scenario that was thrown at them. And the great players I mentioned two of them, Andrew Luck, Christian McCaffrey, but I could name 100 players that great college careers, had great pro careers. It was the preparation. It's what they did behind the scenes. They never bragged about it. They never showed it publicly. They did the work behind the scenes. There were stories that some of these quarterbacks in the NFL would do 50 hours of film review each week. And there's been stories, too, of coaches. And the coaches, same way. I remember one coach that I'm not going to name that basically during the whole season, he basically lived at the training center. He would come home one night a week. He would come home on Sunday nights, but then Monday through Saturday, he was at the training center. He watched hours and hours and hours of film. And I take that, Craig, what we do in the business world. If you prepare for success. Because if you don't prepare for success, you're going to have failure. It's unbelievable the hours and preparation they put in. It's just unbelievable.
They've got to have a tremendous passion for their sport, or they couldn't do it. And the best ones, one thing that I'm finding through my Pro Mindset podcast interviews is that there's no question talent, God-giftedness is important. But the players and the competitors that can outplay their physical limitations through their mental are the ones that really go far. And when you have guys like LeBron, who's got both, then you have a Hall of Famer. Everybody's got physical limitations, and everyone can improve on their physical. You, even as an official, you can have better cardio, you can get in better shape. But if you're not mentally strong, it's not going to matter as much.
That's so true in playing sports. That's so much true in officiating. I always tell folks that truly 90% of officiating is from the neck up. And I've had some football players that I've been around over the years. They said, you see us on TV. And, of course, the NFL Combine, with the one they have in Indianapolis where they do all this testing and all that. For many, many years, they never did really what you would call mental testing. Now they do the Wonderlic test and everything else. And some of these scouts, and I remember talking to John Elway. He was at one of my college Pac-12 games a few years ago. And we were just chatting on the sideline before our game was going to kick off because I've seen the physical numbers. I'm looking for the mental numbers. I'm looking to see what they're doing mentally. And he was looking to see how they check off at the line of scrimmage. How would they pick up the blitzes? Well, all that stuff is mental. I think that was one of the best things I think NFL teams did is when they started doing interviews. I'm not going to give you a Yogi Bear that 90% of this game's half mental, but it is. I think in officiating in particular that a lot of it, 90% of officiating is from the neck up.
There's no question training and workouts and physical preparation is critical. If you don't have that, you probably don't belong on the field or on the court. But your ability to deal with success or failure, disappointment, where you feel like you've been wronged. Sometimes players feel like they've been wronged by officials. Sometimes they feel like they've been wronged by their coaches because they're on the bench longer than they want to be here on the sidelines, and they should be in the game. So I think it's like what you described with Andrew Luck. The ability to overcome a mistake is critical. And so as an official, you got the same thing. I mean, let's say you're out in the game and you make a call and it's overturned. A little bit later, you make a call and it's overturned. What does that do to your psychic? What does that do to your next call? Nothing, because you put it behind you? Or is it like lingering back there? Hey, you're making the call to not be wrong.
When you're young, whether you're a player or an official, when you make a mistake, NFL players, if they make a mistake, they're going to think, oh my gosh, am I going to get cut? Am I going to get renewed for my contract next year? Officials are somewhat similar. God, am I going? Because we're independent contractors, we're on a year-to-year agreement, and if you don't cut the mustard, you don't come back the next year. But I know early in my career, I would, mentally, I would dwell on it, going, how did I miss that incomplete pass? How did I miss that false start? How did I miss that defensive pass interference? How did what? And like I said, you dwell on it, you're going to make the same mistake over again. One of my football crews, when I got started about 23 years ago, I'll never forget this. We were at the Coliseum refereeing USC, and I'll never forget my referee, the crew chief, wore the white hat. He put a 4-letter word up on the board. The 4-letter word was next. But I was amazed on a lot of these college boards, I saw that word next, N-E-X-T, next. They drilled it into the players, and it also got drilled into us as officials. You have to have a short-term memory. You got to go to next. The ones that could go quicker to next were the best players. I have a little saying in my office. It's on my wall here, and I see it before I leave the house. It says, when you're through learning, you're through.
I'm writing that down because that's so cool.
Yeah, when you're through learning, you're through. It's powerful 6 words. You've been around athletics a long time. A lot of people are listening to this have been around athletics a long time. There's so many similarities between athletics and what goes on in society. And I think that's why there's a lot of sports fans in the country, because there's a lot of similarities on what they do in their jobs or what they do in life. And they see it on the football field. They see it on the basketball court. They see it on the baseball diamond. A lot of things I do in officiating, I learned in the business world.
No doubt about it. That's why a lot of really studious, successful players, whether it be high school, college, or pro, are successful business people when they're done, because they take those same principles and apply them to their new industry.
Yeah, I believe your son plays at Nebraska.
He does.
The NCAA has started to promote a little bit more how successful they were outside the athletic environment. And I have no doubt your son will be very successful. If he doesn't go to the NFL or play any other professional football, I guarantee you he'll be, if he takes the things he learned in Nebraska, he'll be successful in whatever endeavor he does outside of athletics.
Well, there's a lot of companies that hire former athletes, women and men, just for that reason, because they've had to balance their time more at college, organize their priorities, be more committed, all those types of things. Just like you playing college baseball, it helped you. You learned some things from your coach there that probably still apply today and will always apply.
Absolutely. I mean, he's passed away many, many years ago, but I think the key thing is the one thing that everybody that's listening to this has in common. All of us have the one thing in common. We all have 24 hours in a day. Nobody has more. Nobody has less. I will tell you this. I'm still amazed at college athletics, how they balance their time and still play women's basketball, men's basketball, baseball, college football. Time demands on a college athlete, and I know you played college sports, the time demand now is greater than what it was when we were going through college. And I'm just amazed how these athletes balance their time. But I do know this, that if you can balance your time, you pretty much are going to be successful whatever you decide to do in life. And I think a lot of that you learn in college, and probably too in high school for that matter, because high school demands and athletics is there too.
Yeah, the demands on high school sports has increased exponentially since we played high school sports. I mean, it wasn't a hobby for me, probably wasn't a hobby for you, but it could have been. It can't be now. You've got to be all in if you're going to play high school sports.
I was fortunate. I got to play all three sports: football, basketball, baseball. But you just don't see that very often, unless it's a small school or rural school. You just don't see that now. And now with the coronavirus and the schools are shut down, the athletes, I mean, their preparation, self-preparation, has to be even greater now. It's going to be interesting when we're done with this crisis and we get back to playing sports. I know there's been articles in the paper about the injury factor, but I think part of it is quality of play too. It's not going to be easy, especially in a team sport. The timing's going to be off. Even LeBron James, as you mentioned LeBron James earlier, as great as he is, he's already talked about his timing's going to be off if the NBA gets back into playing basketball again. And I always think, my gosh, if that's the NBA, what about the non-professional dancer sports? What's their timing going to be like? It's crazy.
Well, Randy, in talking about the virus and this whole strange time we're experiencing right now is truly an opportunity for those that decide to capitalize on it. And so if you're an NFL player, you're a college basketball girl, it doesn't matter what level you play, what sport you play. What are you doing to get better when a lot of people are just sitting around waiting? And I think for those college football players that didn't get to have spring ball, what are they going to do about it? They're going to show up whenever they resume activity again, whether it be in June, May, July, whatever. Are they going to start off where they left off? They're going to take a dip, or are they going to be better? Are they taking this time for self-improvement in some place, in some area?
I will tell you this right now. I'm going to relate to college football. If we play football games in September, October, I think it'll become clear who did the preparation in April and May and June as compared to who didn't do the preparation. I think that's what you're going to see. The wins and losses will tell you who prepared the best and who didn't. I have two things on my office wall. Number one is, did I do something positive today? That's one thing I have on my wall. The second thing is, what did I do to get better today? And I believe on number two, all these athletes, they're looking at the number two. What did I do to get better today? You mentioned Tom Brady when, I forgot now, did he win 6 Super Bowls with the Patriots? I believe it was 6.
6, yep.
When you talk to Brady, he'll tell you that he won those Super Bowls in June and July. May, June, and July. He won them in the off season. All the great athletes say that. We won it in the off season. They didn't win it on January 31st of 2018. That's not when they won the Super Bowl. They won it when people aren't watching, when people are focused on other things. They won it in the off season. And Craig, you mentioned it right now. The preparation is going to be more critical now than it's ever been because spring sports were canceled. So spring football in particular, especially with the newer head coaches, and we have 2 in our region. Colorado and Colorado State have new head coaches in football, and spring football is critical to a brand new head coach. But unfortunately for those 2 schools, they're behind what I call the 8 ball right now. They've got to implement their defensive, offensive, special team schemes. They got to do all that and prep their players. Looks like they're going to have to do that in July and August. And people go, well, that's 8 or 9 weeks before the first game. And for people who've been around football, that's not really enough time. That's like crunching for a final. Instead of crunching the night before the final, now you got to crunch for that final for 4 months. That's kind of what these football coaches are under right now. They're under. Officiating is hard right now. I think the coaches and the players have it harder than the officials do.
I agree. I think the coaches have it really hard, especially the new coaches and the coaches that have new players coming in, whether it's NFL guys and their draft picks, whether it's college coaches that have a recruiting class they haven't had a chance to see yet. They're going to get to see them for the first time whenever they have on-the-field activities at some point in time in the future. And I think that knowing how coaches think, if you're a young man, young woman, and you're going into your sport, let's say it's a fall sport, and however you show up, that first impression, how you handle your business those first couple of weeks, they don't have time to have tryouts. They don't have time to give somebody 3-4 weeks to figure out what he or she can do. It's like, hey, you show up, you're in shape, you know the offense, you know the defense, you know your job, you're going to get off to a fast start, and if you don't, you might get left behind.
You will get left behind. I was just thinking, it was in the Denver Post where the Colorado State head coach is still in Massachusetts. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, it's hard enough to run a college football program, but then you got to do it from 2,000 miles away. And granted, you can do video conferencing and all that, but the personal interaction, seeing somebody eye to eye, seeing their mannerisms. You talked about first impression, and we've all heard it. You don't get a second chance for a first impression. To think that these coaches, and there's quite a few college coaches, and NFL too for that matter, that are trying to run their programs, their teams from a distance or video conferencing. And I feel for those coaches. It's extremely hard for them to do that. And when they get together, I mean, they're going to – it'd be like being on a treadmill and you put it at 5.0 on the treadmill and you've been going at 5.0. Well, these coaches and these players now have to go to 8.0. They're going to have to bump it up about a third or a half.
Well, here's the other thing I would tell you is that we're going to have a lot of virtual Zoom video conferencing meetings. And so for an athlete to really learn the, the installs through video conferencing and then be able to take that on the field is going to be, or on the court, whatever it may be, is going to be very important. But probably equally important or maybe more important is for those coaches that don't know their kids to quickly engage their players. Urban's one of my all-time favorites. Did it at Bowling Green, did it at Utah, did it at Florida, obviously killed it at Ohio State. It's not a surprise. It's not like he did it one place and it was a fluke. He's done it at 4 places, and he's been undefeated in every one of those programs. It just doesn't happen very often when a coach can do that unless that coach has got something to him. And he's such a good leader. He's a great motivator. He connects with his players. He gets to know his players, and they play for him. Yes, he gets 4 stars and 5 stars, but they still have to play for him, and they do. So whether it's CU, CSU, or some other program around the country, the coach that can connect is a coach that's going to get the best results.
I couldn't have said it any better. You mentioned Urban Meyer. I refereed him at all 4 places. I had him when he was at Bowling Green. I had him at Utah when he went undefeated and got them to the Fiesta Bowl with Alex Smith. Had him at Florida in 2 bowl games at Florida, and had him twice in bowl games at Ohio State. If I was in charge of a corporation, he would be one of my top managers. There's no doubt in my mind he could succeed at anything in life. And the players, and on the sideline when players are not in tune to a coach, maybe they're not happy with the linebackers coach or whoever it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be the head coach. I had no doubt in my mind when I had Urban Meyer at those 4 schools, those players would run through a wall for him. NFL players that graduated from Ohio State or Florida, and it's amazing when you hear them talk. None of the players ever said a bad word about Urban Meyer, ever. When you don't have something and somebody speaks highly of that, that's how you know that you did something pretty well. He was one of my favorite coaches to work on the sideline for. He really was.
Well, I like him because he gets the most out of his players, and he seems to be a coach that cares about his players more than he cares about himself. And because he cares about the players' best interest, their well-being, their futures, they take care of him. And a lot of young coaches think it's about them and about their leadership style, their motto, their foundational principles, their success. The players don't connect with those kind of coaches. It's got to be about the players. It's got to start inside and work out and work from the bottom up, not from the top down.
I always heard stories that, and I would believe these stories. I heard it from enough people that when Urban would recruit, he always wanted the parents there. He would never talk to a football player in person unless a parent or parents were there. He never would do that. He would spend a half hour talking to the parents first, and then he would spend a half hour talking to the player. So he would never talk about him, the school. He would never talk about football until that 1 hour was done. He never would. Where I know most coaches didn't do that, but that was his style. That's what he did. He goes, he wanted those parents to know that, look, if I'm going to have this player for possibly up to 4 years, we know they can leave early, but if I'm going to have this player for up to 4 years, I want to know what drives him. I want to know what he wants, what's his talents, because he may not play pro football, but when he gets out of Ohio State or Florida or Utah or Bowling Green, I want him to succeed in life. And I think he just had that special talent of doing that. But there were stories about when he would recruit that can you imagine talking for an hour and you didn't bring yourself up? You didn't even bring anything up about your football program? But he would spend an hour talking about his parents, his family, and then about the player. Amazing.
I think as time went on, it would be easier to do that because, after you've won a couple national championships and you've been national champion at 2 different schools, it's easier, but you don't get there unless he was doing that at Bowling Green and Utah as well.
Absolutely. Because those schools, he didn't. Alex Smith was his quarterback, and I think, if I remember correctly, Alex was a 3-star recruit. So Bowling Green and Utah, I can't even think of those schools having 4 or 5-star recruits.
Oh, no, not a chance.
Not a chance. And what he did at those 2 schools is just unbelievable. And, I had no doubt when he left to go to Florida, there was no doubt he was going to be successful there because he took that foundation. And I always tell people this: if you have a strong foundation, when adversity hits, it ain't going to bother you because you have a strong foundation. Well, obviously he did. And he took that foundation he built at Bowling Green. He took it to Utah, then he took it to Florida, and then he took it to Ohio State. And we know point blank that at all 4 stops, he went through adversity.
Absolutely.
He never wavered. He never cracked. I think I brought in Andrew Luck when he threw that interception. His foundation was so strong, he didn't crack. And that's true. That's true in officiating. But as an official, I got to see that in 2 aspects that most people don't get to see. I got to be on the field with these players to see them go through adversity. I got to see how strong their foundation is. I remember a game, this one coach, went on to the NFL. It was Pete Carroll. You would never know on the sideline. You would never know if he was ahead 24-0 or behind 24-0.
Well, one of the things I've talked about before on other podcasts has been the scoreboard watching and the response and reaction that coaches and players have to the scoreboard. And the best thing they could ever do is turn the scoreboard off. Keep score, but don't let anybody know what the score is until after the game. And, of course, everybody would have their person assigned on the sidelines to keep track. But it'd be really cool because, like, when I coached, the scoreboard affected the kids all the time. In high school, Pine Creek, when I was a volunteer coach, it mattered. We got different amounts of effort from the players depending on what was going on in the scoreboard. And the goal should be to give everything you got, be the best you can be on every play, regardless of the scoreboard. And in basketball, it's such a momentum game. It can change quick. Team could go down and hit 4 threes in a row, and all of a sudden they could go from a big deficit to being in the game or being way ahead. So it's like you shouldn't really pay attention to the scoreboard.
That's amazing you say that. My children went to Pine Creek. They graduated before your children did, but my son played for Coach Miller. At that time, I was in the Mountain West Conference as an official. Miller, every once in a while, would ask me, he goes, "What do you think?" And I said, "Coach Miller, if I was you, stop looking at the scoreboard." Because at District 20 Stadium, the scoreboard is on the south end of the stadium. I said, and you're on the west sideline. Stop, look to the right. Don't look at the scoreboard. You're looking at the scoreboard way too much. I said, I think you would be better just focusing on the next play. He went through some adversity because he had some great teams, and they would lose in the championship game, or they'd lose in the semifinals or whatever it is. But when he won his first state championship, I was so happy for him. But I was one of his first phone calls. He goes, "You don't know what you meant to me with the 4-letter word next and building the foundation that got me through the adversarial situations," because he went through some years that he could have easily won the state championship and didn't, but then he did.
I would say there's 3 or 4 seasons that 3 or 4 teams that he thinks are better than the teams that actually did win.
He's told me that too. You're right, but he goes. But the thing is, if Coach Miller didn't have a strong foundation, I don't think he'd be coaching there right now. And he definitely would not have won. I don't know how many he's won, 4 state championships, but I don't even know if he'd have won 1 or 2 without a strong foundation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Pro Mindset. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. 5 stars, of course. You can follow us on our website, promindsetpodcast.com, or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Pro Mindset Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you the next time.